Well, again, thank you. It's a joy and honor always to be here with you and bring you the message and just share what the Lord's placed on my heart. So we started this sermon series last week called Getting Personal with Jesus. And I told you it was going to be a compilation of several familiar stories that we've heard before, but looking at them very, very deeply, personally. How do they affect us? What do they say to us? And so today we're going to look at the healing of the blind man. Again, one that we've heard before, but there's some key parts in here that I really want us to focus on this morning just a little bit. So as we continue with this, we find today, as with many situations in life, assumption is often wrong more than not. And we believe that today. You know, we know what the old saying is, you don't want to assume things, right? So we don't have to break that down, but we know what assumptions often do. We see something or we assume something before it happens. We've already made an answer, just like this lady was talking about. They've already said, well, this is it. The road's over. But God didn't say that. And sometimes we allow the assumptions to get in the way of things and it not be what the whole story is. So we learn in this very, very account the value of visible works, the visible works of God. But what we also find in this is our responsibility to let Him be seen. Because oftentimes we have the miracles of God happen in our life, but we kind of keep it a secret. We give God the glory, maybe even within the confines like this, but we just kind of hold that back. Yeah, it was good. It was this, that. But God wants us to really let people know, because that's how other people's lives are going to be changed. And we're going to see that come through in this. So we find here, Jesus is on the move. We read as we begin in verse 1, He was passing by and He saw a man blind from birth. Now, I said in our opening that this was going to be important. So this tells us that this is an important thing. The reason that this is written this way, He saw this one blind from birth. So why does that matter? What's the issue there? Well, the Lord, He knew the skeptics and the scoffers were everywhere. They'd already proven they didn't believe nothing, right? So here we find one that's going to challenge that. Here we find one that has not just had an accident, not one that somehow, had something go wrong and they've lost their sight. They've never had it. They've never been able to see, it says, from birth. So he knew all the scoffers and the skeptics and doubters, they were everywhere, and they were always looking for a way to disprove Him or His words or His actions. So if we consider this statement, blind from birth here, we find one who has never seen. All right, that's important as we look at this. So now, there's not going to be any reason to dispute what is going to happen. This miracle would indeed be a work of God. There's no other way that it could happen. This miracle would be known by many as they would all see, because they all knew Him, right? He was the one that had been there since he was probably a little boy running around. They always knew he was the blind guy, the blind child, whatever. And so it is known he cannot see. In other words, this healing was going to be a miracle. This healing was going to be different because nobody could doubt this one. Because they're going to say, as we'll see later, even as Nicodemus would say, we know God could only be the one that could do the things that you're doing, right? And so we see this is going to be the absolute part of this story. There's moments in life that we just have to conclude only God could do it. There's just some things that just happen that there's no other answer to. I've seen that, of course, in my former line of work and most especially over the years in ministry, just things you can't explain. And we're not even talking about supernatural or strange things, but just miracles. Only God could have done it. I mean, just whether it's a bad diagnosis or whether it's it's just countless stories that we could stand here all day telling of people who were told on, whatever day, Monday, that they had this inoperable, tumor, and they go back on Friday for the next check and it's gone. And only God could do that. We see that kind of stuff happen. It is absolutely real. And so this moment, this healing, if you will, this should be a thing of joy. Not a thing of doubt. This should be a time of growing faith rather than skepticism. But all that depends on the heart of the one who's involved. That's how we receive things. It all depends on the heart of the one who is involved. So we see the problem here of assumption immediately coming in, right? Because it says in verse 2, his disciples ask him, Rabbi, teacher, who sinned? Who sinned? This man or his parents that he was born blind? Now, I want us to think about this for just a minute, all right? The disciples, they didn't fully, even at this point, they didn't fully grasp the power of Christ. We can see that, right? They didn't see it at this very moment because tradition and rituals, we see those passing down sometimes, and sometimes they can be okay, and sometimes they're not. It all depends on what's being handed off. We see things sometimes generationally passed down that should have been left when it was first started. We see other things that are passed down like pie recipes. Those are good, right? And so there's a big difference. Well, here, it was already, because we see this even back to the days of Job. Well, clearly you've done something wrong. That's why something's going on in your life, right? So that is a known thing that is just there. Well, here the disciples still feel that way. Who did something wrong? Was it him? Or was it his parents that he was born blind? Now, I want us to draw back to that for just a minute. Who did this? The man himself or his mom and dad? Well, let's look at logic for just a moment. Okay, let's look at logic for just a moment. Oftentimes, comments are made, but oftentimes if we look back after we made the comment, we wish we hadn't. Because we're like, oh, that didn't sound very smart. I shouldn't have said that, or that didn't come out the right way. And we either wouldn't have said it if we could take it back, or we'd be embarrassed that we did. Who sinned? This man, that he was born blind? So before birth, he did something wrong to come out blind. Okay, wait a minute. That doesn't make very much sense, does it? that don't add up at all, right? But before he was even born, when he was conceived, somehow he did something that caused this punishment, this atrocity for him to be born blind. Oh, okay. Well, that doesn't make very much sense. Well, how about his parents? How about his parents? Well, this is their punishment. What did they do wrong that their punishment was having a blind child? Well, that's not how God operates. There's a story. There's a reason. Just like that lady in the thing, that God gave me this child for a reason. There was a purpose behind this, okay? She was the one that could handle that. She was the one that was going to be blessed by that. So we learn through Scripture, just as we do in life, that sometimes things just happen. Sometimes life is just a life. Sometimes things happen as a consequence because we did do something and it resulted in something. And other times, there's a greater purpose. Sometimes there's a greater purpose. Sometimes there's bigger things than just we can see in that moment. I was thinking this morning, as a little phrase came to my mind, life sometimes can be a challenge. Sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes there are lessons that we have to learn. But let every lesson be a blessing. Let it be something that allows you to be a help to somebody else. Because some of the things that I learned along the way in my 55 years, I'm able to help somebody else now. Because if I hadn't gone through it, I couldn't teach you. If I hadn't done it, I couldn't show my children or my grandchildren or whatever the case. So here we see this was the case. Jesus answered them as they're saying this. He said, neither one of them did. Nobody did anything wrong. Nobody did anything. This came about so that God's work might be displayed in him. Displayed simply means everybody's going to see it. This is not going to be a quiet, private thing. This is going to be in public, if you will. So he said, neither this man nor his parents have sinned. In other words, you're looking at this the wrong way. You have the wrong understanding of everything. Everything doesn't have to be pinned to sin and wrong. There's a much greater situation before you. See, we're quick sometimes to assume those things. Well, they must have done this or done that. But that's not always the case. And we see that here. There was a greater good in this. This was for God's glory to be seen by all. This is for God's glory to be all over the place and people's lives to be changed. So what we find here is two levels of blindness. We see one who can't see, and we see those who won't see. And that's two different things. And we still have a major problem with that in the life right now. You know, even back, it was written in a song years ago, there's none so blind as he who will not see. That's still very, very true to this day, because we see that today, the refusal of many. Something might be standing in front of you. I don't see it. It's not that you don't see it. You don't want to see it. There's two completely different things, and we see that happening all the time. And so that's what we're finding here, is this came about. Jesus is telling us this came about, this man's blindness from birth, so that God's work might be displayed in him. God's work displayed. We hear that, and we think, well, wait a minute. What is he saying? Through this healing, through the healing of the blind man, others will see. Through the healing of the blind man, others will be able to see the glory of God. They will be able to see the miracle and the display of God's work. Even those not physically blind, those that are spiritually blind, those that don't see it, they will now know the power of God. They will now know the reality of God. There will be no doubt. There will be no doubt for them who will receive what is offered. Displayed here, of course, this is a key word, because God's work will be seen. It will not be a secret. Our changed lives should not be a secret. Our changed lives should be God's work on display every time we walk, everywhere we go. Now, again, we're not talking about that, that we're wearing long flowing robes and carry a Bible everywhere we go. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about we got to quote scripture everywhere we go. But there's something about a life that just stands out. There's something about that life that has been affected, because now we don't see things the same way. We don't receive things the same way. We are God's work displayed. And that's such a powerful thing that we can learn in this story. Jesus was really driven by time at this stage in his ministry, because it was getting short. It was starting to run out. There was things that had to be done. And so Jesus here, we understand time was important. Well, it was important then, and I'm telling you, it's important now. Now, I'm not a gloom and doom guy by any means, and you who have come to know me know that. I don't get into that. But what I do believe is this: when God puts forth a importance of something, there's a reason. Okay, there's to be mindful of something, and that's what we find in this story. It was important. Jesus said this. He said this in the next few verses. This came about that God's work might be displayed. And then in verse 4, he says, "We must," very important word, "must do the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." So we look here. What is he saying? He said, we must do the works. All right, that's plural. That's important. He said, of him who sent me, that's the Father, while it is day, while the opportunity is available. Does that make sense? If you have a project that needs to be done in the daytime, you got until whenever the sun sets. Okay, that's important. And that's what he's saying. So we're not just looking here at physical time. Obviously, we'll see that. But when we think about it from a logical point of view, we understand that. People that have farmed or people that have built things, people that work outside, you got the daylight. That's how long you got to do it, right? And so he said, as long as it is day, we got stuff to do. We got to get busy while it is day, while the opportunity is there. The miracles, the teaching moments, the life-changing moments, they were all on a schedule at this point, kind of, because he knew what was coming. And he knew night was on the way. And what did he mean by that? Well, he says here, while it is day. That was referring to him being physically with them. That was exactly by him walking with them. But he was also trying to get them to understand the value of paying attention. Because oftentimes, when an opportunity arises, it is only for a momentary moment. Right? Sometimes it's not later. How many times in life, this is a true illustration, how many times have we said to ourselves, I'll do it later, but later wasn't available? Or I'll go pick that up tomorrow, and tomorrow it was all gone. Because you didn't look at the paper and it said the sale was only today. It's not tomorrow. So you go into the place, I'm going to get those, $5 shoes that were on sale today, which I bought some of those. They don't last. But that's a whole different story. But I'm gonna go get them tomorrow. But the sale is today. He's saying while the opportunity is there, while it is day, of course he's speaking about him being there, but he's also trying to get them to understand to pay attention to time. Don't let it pass you by. Don't let it pass you by, because doors can close. I believe today it's very, very easy. We've talked about this many times, but it is very easy to see. We are witnessing evil at levels that we've never seen before, not in our lifetime. We can read about it. We can understand the atrocities of the past, but we've never really seen it. And now with the advent of social media and television news cycles 24 hours a day, it is nonstop and it is on full display. And some kind of get lulled into the idea, well, there's always time. But that's not true. And this is what Jesus is saying. While it is day, we got stuff to do. While it is day, while the opportunity is here, we have stuff to do, because we see here, darkness, night, he says, is on the way when no one can work. Darkness here, Jesus speaks of as though this can be found in both the Old and the New Testament as darkness comes upon the land. What is he talking about? Well, there's several different things that we can look at, but I want to point you to two different references. Number one can be found in the book of Amos. It is found in chapter 8, verses 11 and 12. And this is powerful. I wrote a little work on this a few years ago, asking if this is the future of the nation. And this says this, beginning in verse 11, "Look, the days are coming." That doesn't mean might. That doesn't mean maybe. It said the days are coming. This is the declaration of the Lord. I will send a famine through the land. Not a famine of bread or thirst for water, but of hearing of the words of the Lord. It will become silent. We already had 400 years of silence before Jesus got here, so it can happen. It will happen. He says very clearly here, people will stagger from sea to sea, roaming from north to east, seeking the word of the Lord, but they will not find it. When darkness comes, when all the light is gone, what's left? Dark. What happens in the dark? The unknown, the unseemly, the I'm not sures, the this to that. Okay, where does that lead us to? Well, we lead us to modern times. 2 Timothy chapter 4, beginning in verse 3. For the time will come. There again, another word of assurance. When people will not tolerate sound doctrine, sound teaching, but according to their own desires. This is what I don't want that. I want to hear what I want to hear. They will multiply teachers for themselves because they have an itch to hear what they want to hear. They will turn away from the truth. They will turn aside to myths. Jesus said, work while we have time, because the time is narrowing down. Work while we have light. Jesus said here, night is on the way when no one can work. The grand intent of evil, I want us to understand this. The grand intent of evil, of darkness, is to stop the light. Okay, that's the enemy's goal. If I can stop the light, everybody will give up. Because in the darkness you become hopeless. You don't think there's anything good on the way. There's just no hope. There's nothing left. But if you're in a dark place, if you're in a dark room, and there's one sliver of light that is through a crack in the wall or through that one little beacon of light says, okay, there's something better on the other side of this. There's something there. I can't get there yet, but I got to focus on that. And if you've ever found yourself in a dark place like that, that's exactly where your eyes will go. Okay, it will immediately go to wherever that source of light may be. It may be under the crack of the door. It may be a wall, whatever the case. If you're driving down a dark road, maybe you're by yourself. It's 3 o'clock in the morning and everybody's in bed and all the porch lights are off, but there's one that's on. That's where your eyes go, right? Everything is drawn to the light. So he tells us here, he said, the night is coming when no one can work. Darkness wants to stop it because it is in the light that everybody can see. Okay? It is in the light that everything is open, because in the dark, stuff hides in the dark. We know that. We know that. Trust is not built in the dark. Freedom is not found in the dark. Fear reigns in the dark. But we read here, as Jesus is saying, that time is coming, but while we have the opportunity, while we're here, let's use it. While we have the opportunity, let's share it. Time matters because Jesus said, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. I am the light for the world. This applies to his physical presence, okay, as he was walking with them right that moment. But it also applies to our willingness to display the works of God. So as long as we have the opportunity to be the light of Christ, as long as that dwells within us, we have the ability to shine on the dark. Amen? And we see the beauty of how this all ties to this story of the healing. And we're getting there. We haven't even got to the healing part yet. And he's already telling this massive story, this unbelievable lesson that is absolutely tied to our title, Getting Personal with Jesus. He's trying to get them to understand why this matters. Okay, so the blind guy, he's in line to get the touch, to get the healing, but he's still sitting here waiting. That hadn't even happened yet. All right, so there's the reason, the behind the story, if you will, if we understand what he's trying to tell us here, as long as we walk in him, as long as we show him, as long as we live him outwardly, the blind can still be healed. The blind can still be healed. Getting personal with Jesus is not just about some really cool old stories. It's about learning who we are in him. It's about learning what he wants to accomplish through us. Because sometimes, have you ever asked yourself, or maybe asked someone around you, maybe your kids, maybe your coworker, don't you see that? And if you haven't said it, you've thought it. Didn't you see that? Can't you see what's really going on? We see a lot of blindness today. And again, and this is in no kind of way degrading someone who can't see, but we see a lot of blindness today, not just the physically impaired, but those that will not see. And even though it's like the 8-foot-tall grizzly bear standing in front of you, they're like, no, I don't see it. And it's like, how do you not see it? Okay? But if one is not willing to open their eyes, they're not willing to see. But Jesus is saying, as long as I am in the world, there will be light in this world. But there is coming a time when there will be just darkness. Okay? That's a real strong message to the church today. As long as we're here, whatever time frame that is, we've got a job to do. We've got light to bring to those that are in the dark. Because darkness, we need to understand this. It's big and it's scary and all this other stuff. But it will not win. We need to grasp that today. It will not win. It's already been defeated. But that doesn't mean it's still not going to try. That doesn't mean that it's still not going to try. But my plea, my implorement, everything is shine your light. Shine your light. Shine it continuously. So here, what we're finding in this very first part of chapter 9 is the learning moment. The learning moment for those that are listening. Because again, the blind man, they're talking. You can almost picture this in our minds. He's sitting there and he's hearing them talking. So he's still sitting here. Because he's not even aware of what's getting ready to happen. He can hear them, but he don't know. He don't know that his eyes are getting ready to be opened. Jesus has not talked to him. He has not approached him. He has not told him, hey, you're getting ready to get a miracle. He's just there. So he's hearing all this talk about night and dark and all this other stuff, all right? So we see that. So he's sitting there waiting. And then we read, it says that he said these things to them, and he spit on the ground, in verse 6, and he made some mud from the saliva and spread the mud on his eyes. His, of course, being the blind man. So we read about the mud and the spit, and we become so consumed today with the tangible, with the I need to feel it, I need to see it, I need to have something in order to believe it, that it oftentimes impedes our faith. Because see, faith is that unflagging, unwavering trust that I believe it. I don't have to have a tangible to tell me that it's there. I don't have to have that because I believe if God said it, He meant it, and I believe it. Okay, we should be able to settle on that, but that's not how we operate. Jesus knew that. And that's the beauty of this story, okay? Jesus didn't want to allow that door to even open because he didn't need any room for skepticism or anything, because we got to remember, he's already been accused of being the devil. He's already been accused of working black magic and all this other stuff, right? So we see here the work of God on display. That is the reason for the mud. That is the reason for all the tangible here, right? The mud has been applied. Jesus tells the man, go. He said to him, after he spread it on his eyes, go. That's a very important word. He told him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he left and washed and came back seeing. I love this because we see so many different things. The mud's been put on. Go. That is the key word to everyone who is seeking sight. To everyone who is finding ways and wanting ways to have their eyes open, Jesus says, go. Because not only does that help us, it helps others open their eyes. Because we get to go be light into the dark. That's the call that's been placed on life. He said to this man, go. This was a physical act, if you will. He said, go, wash this physical part in the pool of Siloam. And Scripture says that means sent. This was a place that was known for its healing waters. And the people would go there and gather and want the fresh touch of all these different stuff. But this was another moment that Jesus was intentional, okay? Not only had he physically put this stuff on his eyes, he's told him, now you go. So now the obedience part is what's kicking in now, right? It wasn't just the touch and here it is and now I can see. No, there's going to be some action on your part as well. But also this will quell all the nonsense going on in the public. See, he didn't have time. We go back to the time while we've got daylight. So we can't waste any of that time. Have you ever done that? You know, you've gotten sidetracked on something maybe menial or foolish or whatever, and you look like, daggone, it's already 3 o'clock? How did it get 3 o'clock? I hadn't accomplished a thing today. We sometimes do that, right? That's just kind of part of our way. But here, this goes back to him. Back to everything that he tells always tells a story, and it always ties together. So when he said, while we have day, this is why he was telling the one after he put the mud on his eyes, you go and go wash. This would eliminate conflict, or it should have. Okay, so we also know that when we're dealing with the hard-hearted, that's very difficult because his time at this point is so valuable, and the work before him was being literally guided by eternal value. Petty arguments just couldn't happen. Okay, because and as we'll see, it's still going to happen anyhow, but the Pharisees are going to come in and argue and complain that he made the man better on the Sabbath. Okay, so again, we get into legalism and all the other foolishness that gets in the way of everything still right now. And so, but here, Jesus didn't have time for that, right? The man needed to be made well. He made that happen. So we read here that he left because he was told to go, so he went. The obedience to the things of God are so important. If he's telling us to go today, if he's telling us to be the light into the world, that is a physical act that he's asking us to do. And it says that the man went and he washed. So again, he was obedient. He was trusting in the instruction of Jesus. And it says he came back seeing. If Jesus gives us something to do we trust him enough to do it? That's a real challenge. Sometimes we feel, well, I feel like I need to do it, but there is no but. Okay? We get sidetracked with the but because we put the but in there because we see it as an inconvenience, or I can't, or I don't have the ability, or I don't think I have the ability, and we make all these different reasons, and then the project that needs to be done still don't get done. It happens all the time. It happens all the time, and it messes up the whole scheme of everything because we need to be working while we still have the light. We need to be working while we still have the opportunity to do it as the night is on its way. So here we see one that has been obedient, one that has gone, and it says he came back seeing. Very important. When we align our hearts, and I believe this with all mine, when we align our hearts with the things of God, when we trust the Lord with our lives, we'll come back seeing as well. We'll be able to see things we've never seen before. I can see things right now, friends, in my life, and this is just, and I don't put myself on no pedestal by any means. But when you trust God with your sight, he'll open your eyes. And I'm telling you, you'll see things that nobody else can see. That doesn't make you a paranormal or a psychic, or we're not talking about any kind of goofy stuff like that. I don't have a crystal ball in my office or nothing like that. You can see through things. You can see through intentions. You can see through the dark veil that the enemy's trying to put over our eyes. We can see the truth. And once you've seen that, just as Jesus said, it'll set you free. Heart, mind, and soul. And you'll never go back. You'll never go back, because then you know. It's like knowing how the magician does his tricks. It's not entertaining as much then, right? Because you already know how it's happening. And so when we can see the truth, it changes the way that we live our lives. So it is very, very easy, and I think we can all agree to this. It is very easy to get distracted today. Very easy, right? You're working on a project and the phone buzzes or it makes a ding. What do? Got to check it. Might be important. Sometimes it is, depending on what your circumstances in life, and sometimes it's not. Or you get or there's a message on your on your post, or maybe there's a message on your email. Right? But how often do we not just check the one? And we end up sitting there, let me see what else is going on. And you scroll and you realize, oh man, an hour went by. I got to get back to work. It happens. We are so easily distracted today. It's easy to become blinded to the truth. It really is, because we are inundated with so many things that are anti-truth. Right? Even Jesus would address that. He said, as we get closer to his return, many will already say he's here. And they'll already say, I'm the Messiah, I'm this, I'm that. And we may not hear those literal words, but we hear many that are saying, I got all the answers. Follow me. Listen to me. And it's a very easy thing to get distracted if you don't have your heart aligned with the things of God, right? It's a very, very easy place to be. So this is not knocking anybody, but what we're saying is our job as believers, as followers of Christ, is to bring that light to the blind. We're to bring that light to the ones and help them be able to see. And so even those that are blinded to the truth, even if it's standing right in front of them, we see deception at levels that we really can't imagine these days. We really, really can't. This is why we need Jesus to open our eyes. This is why we need Jesus to open our eyes. You know that? So what's the song? Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. That's what we need to be able to focus on today. The value of sight is priceless. And if you've ever had yours impaired in any way, we know that, right? When you can't see as good. As I started to get, I was actually in my 20s when I started realizing that I didn't see as well as I had once when I was younger. And at that time I'm on the road, and the license tags in front of me that I'm supposed to be calling back to dispatch, I couldn't see what it was. I was getting the letters wrong, and I didn't want to do that, so I ended up having to go and get glasses and what have you. Now wear the contacts for convenience. But once our vision is impaired, it changes things, and we would love for it to be restored. And many people go and get procedures done, LASIKs and this and that, and all these other stuff to restore. We want that youthful vision back. So we know the pricelessness of our vision, not just physically, but even greater. I'll say this today: while we may not always be able to see as good as we would like to with our eyes, our spiritual vision is even more important than that. We got to be able to see the truth. We need to be able to discern. We had that 3-part message on discernment. We need to be able to discern what's right, what's of God, and what's of the world. We need to be able to see that. When we know, that's an old church phrase, but when we know that we know that we know, that no matter what the darkness is trying to hide, we have access to the light that allows us to see. That is vital and imperative to being able to live out this life in a fruitful way, in a way that actually gets us somewhere, in a way that actually gets something accomplished. Friends, we've got access to that light. We need to understand that today. Verse 8. It says that his neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar said, isn't this the one who used to sit begging? And some say, oh yeah, he's the one. But others would say, no, he just looks like him. But he's sitting there saying, no, it's me. I'm the one. And so they ask him, then how were your eyes open? The work of God here we see is on display. And there's questions all over the place, right? There's some that say, no, that's the guy. There's some saying, oh, no, that's not the guy. That couldn't be. But I love the answer that he gives. He says, no, it's me. It's me. I am the one. And they said, well, how did this happen? He says, the man called Jesus. The man called Jesus. He made mud, spread it on my eyes, and told me, go to Siloam and wash. And so when I went and washed, I received my sight. Man, that is so beautiful here. This once blind man, we need to understand this one time before blind man, he says, the man called Jesus made mud and spread it on my eyes. It's like the old song, he touched me and made me whole. I mean, that's what he said. He touched me. He put it on me. And it says, and he told me to go and to wash. That's the instruction that we've all got. All of us have been given the instruction to go. We find that in the Great Commission. Go forth and tell. Go forth and make disciples. We see that. And he says, and so when I went, I listened. I couldn't see. I had no idea where I was going. I couldn't see it, but I listened to him and I went because I listened with my heart. And I allowed it to take me to where I trusted God to say I was going. So the question is, do you? Do you trust him? Sometimes we can't see stuff. You know, we have cliches. You can't see the forest or the trees. You can't see this. Sometimes we can't see it. Sometimes I find myself saying, I'm looking for the answer and I can't see it, and it's right there. But we're getting in our own way sometimes. We're creating the roadblocks there. Here he says, when I went and washed, I received my sight. When I went and did what God said, I'll never forget sitting on the side of the road in my patrol car, tears streaming down my face, asking the Lord, what am I supposed to do? I knew God had called me to do this work, but I'd let everybody and their grandmother talk me out of it, including my grandmother. I mean, you know, oh, you can't do that. You can't, you know what, you got to do this and you got to do that. And I didn't listen to that. In fact, I did listen to that, and it kept me from doing what God had called me to do. And I'll never forget this as long as I live. I can't tell you that it was an audible voice of God, but it was certainly that peace that passes all understanding came upon my spirit. And God said to me, when you do what I ask you to do, it'll all work out. I had to trust that. But he said, you got to trust me. I'm going to make you do it. You can run from this as long as you want to run. That's up to you. Will we go? Will we trust him enough to go when he said go? John Newton so famously wrote, I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Do you wrestle with seeing? Is that a real struggle for you today? And I'm not talking about fixing your glasses or having to get the readers out. I'm not talking about that. Okay, we all probably, everybody in here probably is getting close to that except for our young people. Maybe it's not the glasses or the contacts that need to be fixing. Maybe it's something else. Maybe there's a spiritual blindness there. Maybe there's a shingle there. Maybe there's a hedge there. Maybe there's something that's in the way. Let me tell you, this same Jesus that is the light of the world, he is available to open your eyes today. He is available to change the things that are in the way, if there's things in the way. Getting personal with Jesus. It is so important that we understand the value of that lesson, my friends. Getting personal with Jesus. It is so important that we understand what it is that he's trying to teach us all throughout Scripture and all throughout these different things, because it opens doors. It opens hearts. It opens eyes, because the display of God's work, we need to understand in this story, it not only changed this man's life, but others saw it too. Others saw it too. They didn't just see the miracle, but it couldn't be denied that this was somebody who once was blind, but now they can see. We can see that in a changed life when we can see that person was as lost as the goose in the desert. But now, man, look, they're on fire for God. They're telling everybody about Jesus because their heart was radically saved. Their heart was radically changed. When Jesus opens doors and hearts and eyes, it changes everything, because then, as he says here, the work of God is on display. It upset the Pharisees. They didn't like that at all for two different reasons. Number one, Nicodemus had already said in the book of John, we know that the things you're doing are of God, and they didn't want to have to accept that. They wanted to stay blind. They didn't want to have to accept the fact that he was telling them the truth. But they also hated the fact that the work of God was on display. because that meant others saw it too. See, friends, the enemy hates this. He hates us talking about it, but more so than that, he's kind of okay with it doing it in here, because that's what you're supposed to do at church, right? He don't like it when we go outside. He don't like it when we have the honor and the beauty and the things of God on display in our lives. When we're in different places and somebody says, there's something different about you. And they mean that in a good way. You know, there's something, you don't handle things like everybody else. What's going on? How do you do that? The work of God on display. Jesus said, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. But here's what I want us to remember. This is where we're going to wrap up. Chapter 5 of Matthew, beginning in verse 14. Jesus says this, you are a light to the world. You are a light of the world. A city situated on a hill cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp or puts it under a basket, but rather on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the houses. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. That's the call that God has placed on us, friends. Go. This man called Jesus told me. That's what the blind man said. So my challenge to all of us today as we wrap up, will you go? Will you go? Will you let the work of God be on display in your life? May we let our lights keep darkness on the run. Remember, friends, the lame shall walk. The mute shall speak. The blind will see, all at the word of Jesus. What a mighty God we serve. Getting personal with Jesus. Let him restore your sight. Amen.